Welcome back, guys. Now, if you know Sons of the Shoe podcast, which you can follow wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher. I don't think Stitcher exists anymore. The free Odyssey app, wherever. You guys know the third segment of the show starts off every single time with a Michigan Panic Meter. And so we usually go from gray to scarlet. And gray is the least amount of panic. Scarlet is the most amount of panic. In this case, and I didn't think we'd be doing this soon. I kind of thought something would have to happen to trip this conversation up.
Well, something happened. That's
And it's two things really.
growth.
And we're going to get to it in a moment. Another growth conversation for me here. But we're going to go ahead and do the first ever and maybe only ever true Michigan panic meter. Now you're thinking to yourself, why would Michigan panic? They just won the national championship. Now it would be a lot for me to then accuse them of panic if I didn't have an immense amount of proof. Twofold, in fact. One is there is a petition going around online by Michigan fans to fire athletic director Ward Manuel. And there are valid points about the state of
because he botched. But the big one is because he botched the Jim Harbaugh contract negotiations.
Yes, but again, they reference basketball. There's a third coach that was, second coach that was allowed to leave. I can't remember the program. And then obviously the big one is the assumption is by these Michigan fans that Ward Manuel is the reason Jim Harbaugh left. The second thing is the panic on Michigan and Michigan fans. There's a select amount of Michigan fans on Michigan message boards that are destroying Jim Harbaugh because he has now taken three of his assistants with him. His son, Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, and then Ben Herbert, the strength and conditioning coach. And the first two were expected. But apparently something happened when you take Ben Herbert, the Michigan strength and conditioning coach, that these people lose their mind. They're worried about fucking stretching. In the words of Bob Wiley, Towa was. So I just want to say here, I think Michigan has gone from full maze, no panic, to I think they're at least halfway in between maize and blue, because I think people are starting to bug the hell out here.
I will. So I'm not going to defend the people who are mad about the strength and conditioning coach. I will say I kind of get where that comes from, because the messaging from college teams is always that the strength and conditioning coach is like that heartbeat of the team guy. He's like the rah, build the culture. Like you're working with them on the regular because you're lifting with them. They're putting you through drills, all this different stuff. So I guess I can kind of understand where, like, if they really loved him and they thought he was this rah guy, why they'd be like, well, I can't believe you took him. But it's obviously well within Jim Harbaugh's right to take whatever coaches he wants from his staff that he assembled there with him to the NFL. It's a pretty common practice. So what also is funny to me is like the math doesn't add up on this fully, because you're mad that Ward Manuel apparently botched the Jim Harbaugh situation. And so instead of being like, oh man, yeah, like we really wish you would have stayed, Jim, and just like kind of like, not sympathizing with him, but like being like, oh yeah, it just stinks and we feel bad. Your reaction then to Jim Harbaugh taking coaches with him is like, well, you can't do that. Like that doesn't add up to me. Like if you're mad at Ward Manuel, it just should be Ward Manuel's fault. You then can't be mad at Jim Harbaugh because he's just doing what all coaches do.
You know what the Ward Manuel thing is? The Ward Manuel thing is when one of your best couple friends splits up and you realize that you got stuck with the turd of the marriage, right? And it happens to everybody, where for some reason, like, you don't get to choose. Maybe they choose, maybe it just happens, maybe one of the people move away, and you get stuck with the lesser end of the marriage, and then you're just stuck there. And that's Ward Manuel. Ward Manuel dicked over Jim Harbaugh endless amounts of time. I mean, they had to have the president of Michigan call a ceasefire last year. That's how negative things have gotten. Ward Manuel was behind the contract kerfuffle 2 years previous to that. I mean, Ward Manuel fucked around and found out. And so, like, listen, I fully expect him to be the sacrificial lamb in a year if Michigan is a 10-win team and they take a step back.
Yeah.
Fully expect that if Michigan basketball gets any worse, and guys, it isn't great. I'm not a big Michigan basketball fan, but I do pay attention because of Juwan Howard. It's in a really bad situation,
Yeah.
as low as Michigan's been in a minute. I could see Ward Manuel being the first thing thrown over the board of the Titanic. And the reality is, it probably should have happened the second the guy dicked with Jim Harbaugh's money and started a needless war with the head football coach who was, albeit not where they wanted him to be, also not where they had been with either Brady Hoke
Yeah.
or Rich Rodriguez. So to me, the Ward Manuel thing's a matter of time. I think it's fait accompli.
Yes.
At some point, he's going to be the sacrificial lamb.
So real quick, two things. First of all, maybe the better way to word what I was trying to say on why things don't add up is you can't be like, well, it's all Ward Manuel's fault. We hate you. And then because the guy that you wanted to stay, Jim Harbaugh, he takes coaches and you're like, well, fuck you, Jim Harbaugh. Like that's more what it's like. It's like you're mad at Ward Manuel, but then because you lost this guy that you're apparently like fawning over. But because you use the breaking up example, or like the divorce example, it's like one of those like, well, if I can't be with you, then no one can. So you're just like getting like resentful for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that he left you behind. Second thing, because you mentioned Ward Manuel at some point being the sacrificial lamb, and I 100% agree. What's funny is he went from it was a 180 this year, right? Because you went straight from. At least I'm pretty sure he was part of like those statements that got put out when the whole cheating Connor Stallions thing happened. It was a 180 because he knew he was, what's the phrase I'm looking for? He knew that he was benefiting off the
growth
teat
conversation,
the teat of Jim Harbaugh's success. So he quickly pivoted from, oh yeah, there's been all this bad blood over the years to, oh, we back Jim Harbaugh and anything slanderous against him is completely false and wrong or whatever. So he was real quick to pivot when that whole thing happened. But this goes back to my conversation when we were talking about Ross Bjork, because I never know how to judge ADs truly, because on one hand, Ward Manuel was now going to be, he can say he was the AD that was behind Jim Harbaugh when they won a national championship. And that will always be something like if he goes somewhere else, there'll be a fan base out there that's like, oh, yeah, Ward Manuel, he got a national championship at Michigan. Like, I love this hire. But then the people in Michigan will say, well, this guy sucks ass. He lost Jim Harbaugh. He was constantly fighting with him. Like, there's always so many reasons to hate the guy, and there's always so many reasons to love a guy. And at the end of the day, like when an AD gets sacked, it's often like one or two major reasons that revolve around either your basketball program or your football program that are the reasons why people hate you. And that's what it's going to be with Ward Manuel. We're just going to look back and say, well, this guy sucked because he lost Jim Harbaugh. That will be his legacy there. But there'll be people who are just blinders like, well, he could be a good AD. Look what he did while he was at Michigan. So it's why there's no way to grade ADs ever. It's just go ahead.
The Ward Manuel thing, I think, one, I don't think it's going to get him fired now, but I do think it's the most valid of the points. Message boards flipping out on Jim Harbaugh and accusing him of somehow being unloyal to Michigan after everything he did.
That Ward Manuel put him through, yeah.
Yeah, it's really disingenuous. And listen, Jim could take every single assistant that isn't Sharon Moore to the NFL, and you should still kiss his ass and thank your lucky stars he didn't quit with that contract snafu 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm sorry. If a coach comes in and hires a staff, that staff has incredible success. What's the difference between Jim Harbaugh taking to the NFL and Alabama coming in and offering Ben Herbert twice as much money to be the strength and conditioning coach? There's literally no difference other than they're just going with the guy that they had the most success with. So I think that to me is the most comical side of this is Michigan fans freaking out over Jim Harbaugh. You should probably be thankful he's only taken 3 guys to this point, because he's already linked up with Greg Roman or David Shaw as his offensive coordinator, 2 old assistants that he's had. Like, just be thankful, Be thankful with where you are and understand that, like, this is all part of success. And what I think it underlines is there is concern about Sharon Moore stepping into a job and then immediately having to replace almost half of his on the field staff. But that speaks to that kernel of doubt that should be there, hiring a first-time head coach as the successor to the guy that just had the most success in team history for the last 25 years in winning the first national championship since 97.
Well, and a lot of this too, Nick, boils down to just denial. Because like frankly, yeah, you can blame Ward Manuel. You can say he botched that relationship. And in a lot of ways, as we've laid out, he did. But from all accounts, everything that was reported about this contract that he had on the table, they were going to give him the sun, the moon, the stars. They were willing to make him, exonerate him from any punishments that could come. He couldn't get fired, all this different stuff. They gave him everything. The one stipulation was that he couldn't pursue an NFL job this year. And at some point, like, Michigan fans are just going to have to come to terms with the fact that, like, this guy came to Michigan. He stayed loyal through a lot of bullshit that he had to deal with. And then when push came to shove, but when push came to shove, he was always going to have his eyes on the NFL. That's what I mean. And how many years do we hear, like, Jim Harbaugh could be a hot candidate for the NFL? And there were some years where it wasn't as hot of a topic because Michigan wasn't winning and they were losing to Urban Meyer, and it was like, okay, we don't really care. But once he started sort of winning and turning the program around and doing the consistent thing, it was like 3-4 straight years of, he has links to the NFL. He wants to get back at some point. I mean, we've been hearing this forever. So at some point, like, you just have to stop living in denial and understand, like, it wasn't all on Ward Manuel. Like, some of it was, but Jim Harbaugh just wanted to go back to the NFL, and that is what it is. And he's going to take the staff with him that he takes with him. I guess for my Michigan panic meter, like the true version of the Michigan panic meter, how much stock do we put in the fact that these message boards speak for most of the fan base? That's my big question. Like, is it just, are the message boards kind of like what we think Twitter is, where it's like we hear this vocal minority of the fan bases, or is it like legitimately we should put a lot of stock in the Reddit pages and all this?
I mean, I think Twitter is just a smaller sample size than message boards, because message boards have been around for
That's
20
true.
years.
Larger community, yes.
And larger community, and it is a way for people to stay in connection with each other. Now, do I still think it's 50% of the fan base? No. Like Keith Britton, who works on our show as a producer on Afternoon Drive, he's one of the biggest Michigan fans I've ever met. He thinks both of these things are ridiculous. He might have qualms about Ward Manuel.
Didn't he also say that Jim Harbaugh wasn't leaving, though?
I believe he was skeptical at one point that he would leave. But I mean, no, I just think, like, I don't think message boards are the end all be all, but I think they're a healthy representation of where fans are. And I think, listen, I think what this points to, because panic ebbs and flows, as we found out with the Michigan panic meter that we do about Ohio State and our panic with Ohio State. So it does ebb and flow, but it does illustrate a point I made when talking about the difficulties of the job that Sharon Moore is stepping into. Because the reality is everybody's behind you until that first loss. Everybody's behind you until that first loss to Ohio State. And listen, I think Sharon Moore, because he technically already beat Ohio State last year, should be given a gimme this year when Michigan loses to Ohio State. That's probably not how it works, though.
No.
That's the kind of thing you say in January. That's the kind of thing you say in May, but it's not the reality of November.
Look what Ohio State, like how quickly Ohio State fans, it went from we own Michigan, and then the first we've been saying Ryan Day should be fired. Not we, but the fan base has been saying Ryan Day should be fired since that first loss to Michigan in 2021. They've been saying it ever since. And every year after, it's been louder and louder and louder. So I think it's the same thing. Like at the second, it's easy to sit in your ivory tower right now and be like, well, we're the national champs, and we're not worried about Sharon Moore. But I think a lot of that is just it's PR, it's branding from the fan base. Like you're letting somebody into your house for dinner, and you have happy faces on, and then they leave, and behind the scenes, like, you and your wife are feuding with each other and going through a divorce. Like that's almost what it feels like, because they're playing the part of, oh, we feel good about Jerome Moore and we're not worried because we just won a title. But behind the scenes, I think there really is some panic sort of brewing of like, well, our time at the top might be coming to an end here. And I don't want to go back to where Michigan was before, Harbaugh finally got it together and started beating Ohio State. And that feeling of that, that might be what happens. I'm not saying it is, especially next year. Like, there's still going to be enough talent there. I think that they stay afloat and maybe they lose a couple games, but it's not like complete disaster. Not that it ever was with Harbaugh. He was never losing. Like, he had the COVID year, which was bad, but that was a fluky year for everybody. But yeah, like if they go back to just losing to Ohio State consistently, I don't think Michigan fans are willing to accept that. And I also just think the panic that we're seeing sort of just speaks to like, what have you done for me lately? And I get it on some level. It's had to have been an emotional roller coaster. You go win a national championship, but then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, your coach is the coach that brought you there is leaving. So this is the most recent thing. And on some level, I'm sure Michigan fans probably are looking back, relishing like, well, I'm glad we got this moment because it might not be lasting very much longer. And they got to kind of live with that. I guess I'll put my meter, if we're assuming white is kind of also in the middle here of the maize and the blue, I'm probably going to lean.
That's Michigan. So
I'm just in the white, leaning slightly towards the blue. And it's funny. I think, like I said, I think Michigan fans who listen to this, they're going to be in our comments like, what do we have to panic about? Ohio State's going out there and trying to add all these recruits because they can't beat us, blah, 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 blah. But I think behind the scenes, there's like a small internal panic brewing.
I would say to those Ohio State fans, we do appreciate you commenting in the 92 through the fan, the YouTube channel. Please continue to do so. I would say after commenting on our page, maybe go to those message boards and speak some of that cockiness. Because I think to what you're saying is, I do think like you present a different message to your foe than you do your friends. And I'm not buying this kumbaya shit. I'm just not. Now, that doesn't mean that the sky is falling, but you mentioned it. I think it would be like when Urban left and Ryan took over. I needed to see the team go out with Ryan. He was a first-time head coach. It's totally different. Like when they hired Urban and he had 2 national championship rings. It's totally different than when they hired Tressel, and Tressel ran Youngstown State to multiple national titles at that level of football. It's totally different when it's a guy's first job at that level. Now, what I would say is I think at Ohio State, it's tougher to be a first-time head coach than at Michigan, but it will for next year, it's going to completely revolve around probably hitting the 10, maybe 10, 11 win threshold overall and beating Ohio State. And if you don't do one or both of those things, it's not going to take much to get people panicking in Ann Arbor, because that's how we act. That's what we do in college football. That's just the reality of the situation.
You brought it up last episode, but it's different. Like, I think the other thing that Michigan fans are falling back on right now is like, well, Jerome already beat Ryan Day, so what are we worried about? But I think you brought up the big point last episode. The prep work leading up to that game was all Jim Harbaugh because he could hold the practices, and B, it's different when you're the guy. He was the guy for a day, and there's no pressure of like, hey, when you leave that stadium, you go back to just being your role and dealing with what you got to deal with. Now you got to deal with everything. So it's different. And I think the best way to sum up kind of what we're alluding to, which is like the persona that fans are giving off right now, Michigan fans, that is, you've seen the movie Deadpool, right?
Oh, yes. Many a time.
You know the scene where he shows up at the door of Professor X of like the X-Men, and I forget the joke that they make, but they say something, they call him a name or whatever, and Ryan Reynolds like laughs and he goes like, ha, fake laugh to hide real internal pain. That's what it is. Yep. Michigan fans right now are like, they're fake laughing in our faces. They're like, oh, you guys have to go out and get all these recruits because you can't beat us and we're fine, and Jerome Moore. But meanwhile, you're trying to get your AD run out of town because you think he botched the Jim Harbaugh thing, and you're pissed off and you're crying because Jim Harbaugh is taking your assistant coaches and strength coaches. Like, there's a little bit more than meets the eye. If you need to talk to somebody about it, Nick and I will gladly be This is a
in
good
the
idea for a
comments.
future episode. This is we can be Michigan fan therapy sessions. We will offer them to you 20-minute blocks on Sons of the Shoe, or just in the comment section on the 92 Through the Fan YouTube.
I think that's stealing a Baskin and Felt bit, which we just, on principle, I refuse to do. But to the Michigan fans,
we got some people who really enjoy that show. So
Michigan fans they're smarter than us. I've always said that.
Yeah.
But Michigan fans, this is your one chance, right? You're always commenting on the Michigan Panic Meter here. Leave the comments, 92 Through the Fan YouTube. We've got maize. We've got light maize. We've got white. We've got light blue. And we've got the full blue. And maize being the least panicked, blue being the most panicked, and obviously the three levels in between being some iteration of that. Where do you guys stand wanting to fire Ward Manual? Jim Harbaugh rating your staff. 92 Through the Fans YouTube comment section there. We will interact with it there. Ohio State fans, we also want to hear what your guys' thoughts on today's show were. Please make sure to follow the show everywhere you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. And make sure to hit the old follow on 92 Through the Fans YouTube channel as well. That does it for us. Go Bucks, Spencer. Great show.